Carole Nervig is the author of The Petroglyphs of Mu, Pohnpei, Nan Madol, and the Legacy of Lemuria. Creator of the Nan Madol Foundation now lives in Ecuador. There is a metaphysical element in this. We'll get into that. She spent more than 4 decades researching Micronesian traditional culture and oral history, as well as the sacred sites of Micronesia and Hawai'i. She first moved to Micronesia as a Peace Corps volunteer in 1969. While there, she discovered something fascinating.
What is this site? This is incredible. And why don't I know about it? Why doesn't the world know about it? That's what got me started.
Carole Nervig, and basically what this is about is like the discovery of a lifetime. When you just stumble into something that would be like the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow or the Holy Grail. What did you discover?
When I discovered it, I'm only using the word discover. I mean, rediscovered, perhaps, would be a better term. The Petroglyphs site is on the island of Pohnpei in Micronesia, in the Federated States of Micronesia. Finding this site was all synchronistic. Me being there on the island, being sent there in the Peace Corps, then being assigned near Nan Madol, which is, world-class World Heritage Site, and then returning later. I was brought to this site by, again, Serendipity, which is, all that's another story, more details if you like. The site itself has 2 components. One part of it is very well known. I went there many times, even I was in the Peace Corps from 1969 to 71, and this huge rock outcrop was there, and there were petroglyphs on it. They weren't real sophisticated, with the exception of maybe 1 or 2 things. And, at that time, I wasn't all that impressed, actually, in terms of the motifs. Well, when I returned in 1990 to create the Nan Madol Foundation, I was asked to make a presentation on Nan Madol to the South Pacific Regional Environmental Program. And so I did, and I met the consultants from Australia National University. And of course, everybody ends up, it's a tiny place with a handful of restaurants, so we all end up having dinner together. And one of the consultants was just bugging me about, he loved petroglyphs. I think he was a geologist, but I'm not sure, or an economist. Anyway, that was his avocation. And he said, well, are there any petroglyphs on this island? And I said, well, yes, there are. And he said, well, where are they? And what, I explained a bit. And he said, well, will you take me there? I'm just going, oh, it's incredibly hot and humid. And doing a long trip around to the other side of the island was not anything I look forward to. So he kept insisting. So I said, okay, if you rent an air-conditioned vehicle, I will take you there. So he did. We got to the site, and the first surprise, it had been Pohnpei Island. Well, you're familiar with like Kauai and the amount of rainfall it gets, 400 and some inches a year.
Yeah.
Pohnpei Island is the same. I mean, it's always raining, wet. I mean, a lot of sun too. But there had been a drought there for whatever reason, and I didn't really think about it. And we parked, and then we walked to the site, and adjacent this well-known outcrop, there was a whole meadow that was burned off. Because what happened is the kids, they're never able to burn anything. So they went out, with their matches. Oh, look at this burns. So they burned this whole huge meadow. Well, once it started, it kept going. And so, we looked in that direction and saw, instead of going to the outcrop, we headed to the meadow. And once we got there, I mean, I was just stunned, and there were these huge boulders and some I would call megaliths there. And we were kind of trying to decide which direction to go. And then he said, come here, Carole, I'll show you something. And I walked over, and there was this huge phallic-shaped megalith, and it was covered with hundreds and hundreds of petroglyphs. I mean, I was just almost disoriented. I mean, I felt like I was in an altered state. How can we be seeing this? Is this real? So we wandered around, and I took a few photographs, and he took photographs. Luckily, he had the presence of mind to do that. But I was just, I was just in a state of shock because it was so high. Hindsight, I assumed I'd be back many times to this site, and I wish I would have taken more photographs because there were so many more petroglyphs that I have no photos of, because within a month or two, a couple of months, a lot of it was covered, became overgrown with jungle, and then, 6 months or a year, it pretty much disappeared.
You mentioned that serendipity or synchronicity, or, how you managed to get there. You want to go back on that, and this is the Petroglyphs of Mu. This is an extraordinary find.
Looking back on all this, I ended up on Pohnpei Island. That was the first synchronicity that drew me into this, what turned out to be sort of my life's work or purpose or mission. When I joined the Peace Corps, you can request preferences for locations and so forth, but I'm from Iowa. I didn't know what places were good and I figured, I'd end up maybe in Africa or South America, maybe the Pacific if I was lucky. Turns out my assignment was Pohnpei Island in Micronesia. For those not too familiar with the Western Pacific, it's Western Equatorial Pacific. Pohnpei Island is part of the Eastern Caroline Islands, geographically and politically part of the Federated States of Micronesia. It's one of the states. To place it for people, probably the most well-known landmark would be Guam. Guam is geographically part of Micronesia, not politically. And Pohnpei is about, by jet, 2.5 hours southeast of Guam, in the middle of nowhere. So that was my assignment, not by choice. And then once I got to the island, I was assigned to Lotpa, which is a village near the ruins of Namadal, which, of course, I'd never heard of at the time. So that was very beneficial that I was in the neighborhood, so to speak.
Had you been drawn to anything like the petroglyphs that you write about in this, had that been of interest in any way, earlier? Well, no, I was not particularly knowledgeable or interested in archaeology. And at the end of our 6-week Peace Corps training, our reward, they put us in about 3 boats and they were taking us to the Namadal site, which is this enormous Venice, if you will, with canals and 40-foot walls of columnar basalt. So we had to leave during the middle of the night in order to catch the high tide to get through the breakers of the reef to get there. So we're in darkness this whole time and in the open, outside the reef. And we arrived at Namadal and it's still dark. So we're kind of crawling over the stones to get out of the boat. Then when the sun came up, we were surrounded by this incredible sight. 40-foot walls and we were all just shocked and impressed, but my emotion was kind of anger. It's like, well, what is this site? This is incredible. And why don't I know about it? Why doesn't the world know about it? And so that's what got me started, because I was teaching English there, like most of us. And so I decided I wanted to find out about these ruins.
So I tracked down Masao Hadley and Pensley Lawrence, and they were the two expert elders on the site in its oral history. And so I worked with Masao, and I published the first little booklet on Namadol in 1970. Amazingly enough, the Trust Territory government published it. So the idea was to help sell the booklet for $1 and then use the money to help clear and preserve the site. That was my first interaction with Pohnpei archaeology. And it wasn't until later, after I finished Peace Corps, went back, had my life, and then I had my midlife crisis. I sold my business, everything, moved back to Pohnpei to start a nonprofit, the Namadol Foundation, to help, write grants and get funding for preserving the site. I mean, I was really, I suppose, addicted to telling its story. Mm-hmm. Again, now Namadol is much more well known and well recognized. Still a lot of mystery around it, but there is some information. So when I returned to do the Namadol Foundation, that's when I did this presentation and met the professor, and that's how I ended up at the Petroglyph site.
And I love the fact about the people being kind of a trickster, jokester. They don't want all the truth to come out, so it's split into different areas. I love that. I love that. It's like, okay, so we don't even know from their history, whatever would exist, whether they would ever give us the story anyway.
Oh, absolutely. And unfortunately, most of what's, aside from my book, there's almost nothing on the Petroglyph site. I mean, this new part of it. But even Namadol, a lot of the videos I've seen in TV shows, and it doesn't seem like many have really taken the time to research the oral histories. And everyone seems to make, even some archaeologists, conclusions. Okay, this is the way it was at Namadol. Well, that's not necessarily the case. I mean, the common story is these two brothers came from the outside, somewhere in 900 or 1000 AD and built this site, or at least the megalithic, the large structures. However, there were settlements and basalt structures at that site well before that. An archaeologist from Honolulu, Steve Athens, he found, some shell bracelets and various adzes and artifacts, and his dating was 0 to 200 AD. So this is who built these, and there is some oral history about the Pali people that were living in the Namadol area, and they were astronomers, engineers, scientists. They were very well educated or very knowing, and only one anthropologist. I mean, he had Pohnpeian sources for this information, but he wrote it up, Glenn Peterson. So here's another whole story that's never mentioned about Namadol. And these are likely the ones that did the layout and the plan and the engineering for this site. Just joking around with Pohnpeians. I've seen them tell tourists certain things, and I'm just rolling my eyes, and it's like, oh, you got to be kidding. But there are lots of different versions of the oral histories. Sharing these oral histories to them is like an art form. There was no written language way back when. I mean, there is now, but based on the oral language. So oral history, recounting that, is an art form to these islanders. And so they repeat it generation after generation. And so what they do, what they believe, what you mentioned, you don't share everything because then you'll lose your power. So they would give these accounts, these oral accounts, but they might change a few details. So only they would know the truth, right? So it's just like a swamp wading through all the various versions of some legends. And each migration that came, there were 7 migrations, they would come from a slightly different place and have a different version and everything, and every one of them, and there are different creation myths too. So it's really difficult. However, with Pohnpei, the petroglyph site, the new part, there's no oral history about that. So that's why I conclude it's much older than Namadal and who knows, everything on the island. And it might have been something that survived from the continent of Mu, the mountaintop, where sacred sites are often on mountaintops, or it could have been built by descendants of survivors of Mu that came back to the location and built an altar or a memorial to what was gone.
See, I think it's fascinating the different references that are in the image that are similar to other cultures. There has to be some unifying force here. So in one part of the book, you talk about possibly a cataclysmic event that they could all see from the sky, but it doesn't mean, some of these cultures, it's different timelines for these too. So that's what to me is fascinating, that how all of these diverse and completely opposite parts of the world have a similar image. What's your philosophy behind that?
I credit that to a universal mother culture on this planet that was originally in the Pacific, and it sunk. And there are many theories about that, but to me, the evidence is that the migrations, when Mu was in the Pacific, it was highly advanced, and it had colonies around the Pacific Rim, and then they moved further. For example, I believe Atlantis was a colony of Mu, and then from Atlantis went on to Egypt and went. Therefore, all of these similarities in the symbology, because I feel it's one origin for all of it, and with variations, of course. That's how I would explain it. If it's not Mu, some universal mother culture, but it definitely predates Atlantis.
One of the interviews I did a few years back was with someone who had actually been staying with one of the Aborigine tribes, and learning from them and spending some time there. My experience was in that morning of the interview, I was just between waking and sleeping, and someone that sounded right beside me on the bed said my name. And I knew, because they also practice telepathy. They are incredibly, I think, adept at that. That isn't something that everybody talks about, but people who have spent time say that's a part of their culture that is important. And the shamanic element is also represented and very present. So I suspect, because of some of these images that also are similar to what they have described, like Terence McKenna, the shamanic visions they have when doing ayahuasca or some other like peyote, then this is also part of. You don't have to do the drug to do it. You really don't. You just, if you're in the mindset with the frequency, the vibration, you are connected, and it doesn't matter where you are. And so I'm thinking that also might play a part.
Oh, certainly a shamanic site. It was, being that ancient and that sacred, and there's archaeoastronomy, there are astronomy glyphs, there are alignments, and the motifs, the fertility themes, and I believe there's a stone circle there. And of course, Pohnpei, Namadal, and the sunken city under the water, which was the reason Namadal was built, to honor that city. It's on, a global energy grid. So the siting itself indicates that it would be also used for shamanic purposes. And in fact, the one legend about how this site was created was these 2 boys came from another district. They stole a blanket, and they ran away into Micronesia district. They threw the blanket on the ground, and it became the petroglyphs.
Talking about the petroglyphs of Mu, Pohnpei, Nan Madol, and the legacy of Lemuria.
So, blanket has maybe designs on it or whatever. And after they did this, then there was a doorway in this outcrop. So they left through this doorway in the rock to go wherever. So, that is totally...
Yeah, that's a portal or a different dimension. They came here and then left, and they didn't come from the same plane that we consider our reality. So that's the origin story.
The interesting thing, I think, obviously there's extraterrestrial interaction there, whether it was created or the advanced, those advanced beings back when, they had all the tricks, they knew how to manipulate nature and so on and so forth.
Right. And
there is a petroglyph, you probably saw it, that looks like an ET. On Pohnpei Island, their rituals involve eels, which are basically aquatic serpents. Again, this site, it has all the components of a shamanic sacred place, an interdimensional portal, et cetera, et cetera. But the Pohnpeians, they have the story of how it was created, and that there was a goddess that came down from the heavens, and in various versions, they cut her in pieces, and thus the vagina stones. However, no one has a clue. No one ever talks about what these petroglyphs mean. They don't know. This is not their site.
To me, it's encouraging us to have babies. And at that point in time, I think that was an issue. They needed to populate the planet, and you don't do that without celebrating fertility and celebrating the body and all of the aspects. I think it's actually much more base. It's just like, and positive. They're putting, the sex parts out in public display saying, these are good. This is good. This is not bad, as opposed to today.
Right. And the Pohnpeian culture is great because they do not have any sex hang-ups. Sex is, it's more of a sport or entertainment. And it's a totally different than family. You're committed to your family. You don't mess with that. But sex, well, that's another thing. And a lot of their humor is sexual, and they just, it's just a joy to listen to them, make their jokes and everything. So yes, and that's part of, the ancient, remnants and legacies of the mother culture. And I just wanted to say, the thing is, I don't want to just write off all of this everything to ETs and stuff. I believe what's more important were these advanced races that were here. They had these abilities, and whether, it was probably a combination of both, or they were it's just not simple, of course, but there's certainly, and the other thing, of extraterrestrial influence could be the stone with the 7 stars.
Yeah, and the Dogon. You mentioned the Dogon in here with their understanding. Well, there are several cultures that have a specific, the 4-star or 4-pointed image that is related to astronomy and studying the stars. And I think that's brilliant. Well,
there's something really interesting astronomically there. And what I call the astronomical evidence at the site is a huge boulder. And it's huge. You could stand on it, and in the middle of it is this circular basin. I suppose, it's been so many years. I suppose it's about, maybe 12 inches in diameter. And when we were there in the drought, there was water in it. It wasn't that deep. So what's with that? And next to the edge of this basin, there are these geometrical petroglyph lines that come up and touch the edges. And so this is similar to called star basins and various other sites around the world. So at night, you would see the reflection of the stars in the water, and you could track their movement around the basin with these marks.
Wow.
And yeah, yes, yeah, yes. And when I first saw it, I didn't really, I didn't know what this was. I had no clue. I mean, well, I was just pretty in an altered state to begin with. But yes, and also at the site there is a petroglyph, which is similar to the Carolinian Islanders were the first navigator. I mean, that's where this whole navigation, resurrection of the culture started. And there's a particular kind of compass they use called the Carolinian compass. And there is a petroglyph very similar to that. And above it is a sun, and underneath is a moon. And so to me, this is also a stargazing site, definitely. And whether or not the 7 stars, or they could be birds, they could be stars, but there are 7 of them. And unfortunately, the photo I have only shows 2 of them. I didn't get all. I believe there were 7. I might be wrong, but I was pretty sure because I remember I was aware of the Pleiades and the 7 stars of the Pleiades. So that could be another strong hint of the stargazing astronomy component of the site.
The fact that you have gone through and tried to relate multiple elements of different cultures and talking about the geology or the ley lines, the PowerPoints, those kind of things in here, the pictures of the carvings in Peru. I think it's Peru where those are precise square angles. We don't have anything like that, or we didn't think anything like that existed from that time period that create that kind of an impression in stone. These things are so curious.
Well, I was, my lifetime, I've spent literally decades doing this research. I mean, hoping I would publish something at some point, but it was my passion, and I was drawn. Thank God for the internet, as much as I moan and groan about tech issues. I was able from, my desk to research all these sites around the world. And that's all I did. I wasn't sure why I was doing this some of the time. My friends thought I was crazy, but now at this point, it's very clear to me how my whole life was engineered to propel me along this path and share this information.
At the basis of this is the Mother Goddess. It's kind of a refresh on the fact that the culture has, in many ways, eliminated the female voice. When I look for quotes or I look for artwork and I see this long, long list of males and no females represented, we're trying to bring more recognition to that, but they're gone. In some cases, they've been completely erased. And so here we go back to the cultures from way, 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 way back when who had the goddess represented, and not just in one culture, but in many cultures throughout the world.
Well, exactly. And that was part of my conviction. I'm the only one that's calling this a fertility goddess site. Well, first of all, not that people know it. Many people know what's there to even identify it. But I am convinced that this is the case. And like you say, this is hugely important to understand that the advanced civilizations of the past were balanced masculine, feminine. And it's one of the reasons I wrote the book the way I did, with right brain, left brain chapters, to demonstrate, a way to bring about this balance. And I was reading just recently that there was I guess they're called papal bulls or something, a statement from a pope way back when that these pagan sites instead of trying to get rid of them, it was actually instructions to build churches on top of them, to take, usurp that power,
Right.
which, of course, was had a lot to do with the goddess in that more balanced society. That's one of the reasons I think it's so important to share this site, is to another example in the middle of the Pacific. However, the Pacific Islanders, until like Pohnpei, until the Germans came to occupy, when was that? In about, I'm horrible at dates. They were there before the Japanese, in the Japanese prior to World War II. When the Germans arrived, at that time the property was all in the name of the female, but they changed it and switched it to being owned by men rather than women.
There was the same issue with Hawaii. Oh, go ahead. However.
Yes, Hawaii, yes, another example, and there are parts of that are still maintained there. And in Micronesia, in Palau, the Republic of Palau, there, the women are they were the chiefs. And in the Marshall Islands, which is also Micronesia, I believe it's the property is still passed down along the female line. So there are legacies, there are remnants of this still in the Pacific.
There was a shaman involved. He gave you a picture of the elephant.
Yes.
Okay, let's talk about that. That's fascinating.
Oh my God. Well, see, when those things happen, that's why I got so addicted to doing this. Like, what is going, I've got to do this is too big of a synchronicity. So while I was doing the foundation, a friend of Pohnpei, friend of mine, he knew that I was involved with the Namadal Foundation. He gave me this photograph. It was 2 photographs, black and white, and one was of this old man, this shaman-like man. I don't know. To this day, I have no idea who this man is. And then he gave me a picture of this rock. And it was like very unusual shape to it. And I said, well, what are these for? And he didn't know. He said, you're just supposed to have them, is all he told me. Just keep them. It's like, well, luckily I did. They were off in some files or something. And then once I came across Pohnpei Petroglyphs site, and I had, some photographs, and then I found this old picture, and it looks like an elephant trunk. And these 2 photos, the one that was given to me and the one that I took, the exact same rock. And it was, my theory, maybe some kind of Ganesh site or rock, because many of these ancient sites in the Pacific Rim, their temples had these elephant sculptures in front of them, or a part of them. And it also, I lived in Hawaii on the Big Island for 20 years, so I know what lava looks like. And the trunk of the elephant, it looks like pohoihoi lava, kind of smooth, wrinkly, and that it may well be. But the fact that, it certainly is basalt, but it just, the way it was carved and shaped, and the fact that I was given this exact photograph years ago convinced me that this, in fact, there's something significant about this rock, or, at least the whole site.
The commonality with other cultures. To us right now, everything's so separate because there's ocean. Well, there were other cultures that are now under the ocean. And that, I think, just is the tie, saying at one point we weren't separated the way that we are now.
Well, exactly. And the Ganesh and that's Hindu culture, and Hindu is one of the oldest religions and has a lot of connections with Mu and Lemuria. Yes, well, a lot of lessons to be learned for all of us. Hopefully the outcome that I'd like to see is not only the acceptance of the mother culture and the sophistication and just that whole more spiritual part of being all one is more widely accepted. And then the other thing is, by this book, it's like I am not qualified to go back out there. I'm not an archaeologist. I wouldn't know how to. All I know how to do is take photographs. And so I really hope that this book will be a catalyst for funding and grants and for archaeologists to get back there with LIDAR and various new drones and new technologies to really completely document this site. I went back in 2018. I did a GoFundMe campaign and to get back there so I could take more petroglyph photos for this book. Well, I get there and, I'm showing these photos to, historic preservation and government officials and like, hey, you guys, we need to get out here. We need to clear this and I'll show you where these stones are. And of course, time moves, Micronesian time, things move slowly. And I only had a month. So it turns out that my Peace Corps families, two of them, drove me out to the site, and he got another guy so I had a couple of guys with machetes. And the site, I could hardly, they thought it was crazy, and they didn't want to follow me into the grass and the jungle to do this, but I went, and of course, if I'm a woman and I'm going, well, they're guys, and they have to had to follow me.
Yay.
But only that, it was the very largest megalith was the only thing that I could find. And that was hard to find itself. And everything else was completely overgrown. Roots and limbs and so that was really disappointing. But that's what needs to be done. And I'm hoping this book will trigger that. And this should, in my opinion, this petroglyph site should be part of the greater non-Medal site that is now a World Heritage Site, because it's very close, and I feel it's complete. It's part of the complex of these three sites.
There is so much here that is like an opportunity to take another look at our history, our prehistory, and what we have qualified as it's been there, done that. And instead it's there's a whole lot that's been left out and still waiting to be uncovered, recovered, discovered. And this is one of those sites that I think you are bringing attention to that's extraordinary.
Well, it makes me very happy. Very happy to have finally finished the book.
Yeah. After what, a few years?
Yeah, well, off and on for decades. Yes, literally. My move to Ecuador was helpful. The first year or two, I was getting settled, so to speak. And then I really, really finally focused day in, day out on getting this written.
I think the shamanic element is important. I believe that some of the prehistory, before we started actually understanding there was a prehistory, they were much more adept with their psychic abilities, and that's what they depended on and relied on to get from point A to point B, because this is something that is in all of us, and we're a little lazy with it now. Doesn't mean it isn't there. It just means it needs a little bit of elbow grease to refresh and get
dormant.
Yeah.
And they, at that time, those cultures, they knew, they were so connected with the earth. They were guided by those forces as well. And we have, for the most part, lost all that, except for indigenous shamanic cultures, which some of them maintain that, or at least some understanding of they all agree, the land that's who they are. Yeah. And that's the most important thing.
Yeah.
And we need to get that again. We need to accept that and work with that. Interesting, like all of these new discoveries, these sacred sites, and they're pushing the dates back on everything, and it's really exciting.
At this point, it's lost in terms of jungle all around it and stuff, but beyond that, the other meanings behind it in terms of, you have included the possibility of portals and interdimensional contact and extraterrestrial influence. I like that. I think that the more we understand that some of these images are actually depicting something beyond our current frame of reference, our current concrete reality going into that. Is there anything that you felt affected by that psychic element, that interdimensional element, anything like that because of this?
Oh, lots of things. And those experiences were part of keeping me motivated and on track to keep working on this. Well, this was actually to do with non-Madal and my belief these three sites in a complex being portal, or marking the original portal of the city of Pohnpei, which was sunk under non-Madal. Anyway, I was scuba diving, and I was near non-Madal, and I was with a group, but the Pohnpei dive masters could be a little lax, everyone went ahead, and I was sort of behind, and I wasn't that deep. I was only like about 70 feet deep. And this could be chalked up to nitrogen narcosis, but I don't think so. Because I wasn't that deep. Anyway, I was swimming along, and then all of a sudden I was in my body and I wasn't in my body. It was like, oh my God, what? And I mean, I wasn't really afraid, but the weird thing, and this isn't something I would typically do. I kind of in my mind kept repeating the Lord's Prayer. It just sort of, childhood stuff, it just sort of popped in.
Yeah.
And it was like, I don't know where I went or I was there, but I wasn't there. And then finally somebody came back and Carole. But to me, that was my personal subjective evidence of, being an interdimensional portal there. Mm-hmm. I had that experience.
By location, basically, your astral body and your physical body, and all of a sudden, like, how do I get back home? Yeah,
well, there was part of that. I didn't really have thoughts like that, but yeah. It was like, how far do you go? What about coming back? And I think that was why, that the Lord's Prayer thing
yes.
was sort of
that was grounding.
Part of me grounding.
Yeah, it was grounding. Yeah. Trying to touch base and hold the cloak and say, okay, I'm going out, but not that far.
Yeah, right.
You obviously have been called to do this. There's such a tremendous pull, and the information that you have put together includes that esoteric shamanism, the other element. And I think that's important because a lot of times that just gets totally tossed by the wayside, and no respect for the indigenous cultures who say, hey, this is really important too. It's like, no. We don't understand it. We're not going to include it.
Yes. Well, that patriarchy influence, it's like, that's why we need to come into balance, because these things are dismissed with that mentality.
Is there anything you want to add?
I don't think so. I could go on for all night long, of course, but no, I think, I think we're good. I'd love to get back there as a consultant, not as a worker that's my dream, is like to go back again, and after the area is cleared. But once they clear it, it'll be obvious what's there. But anyway, I'm hoping to see more of that revealed by others.
Yeah, I think you've done a fantastic job of at least exposing it and saying, this is where it is, this is where you look, and this is what it's about, to let other people, follow the breadcrumbs and put more pieces of the puzzle together.
Well, I sure hope so.
The importance of the petroglyphs of Mu. What is Mu?
Mu, some refer to it as Lemuria, is a continent or landmass in the Pacific that sank pre-Atlantis and dating it, some range from 75,000 to millions of years. And anyway, it's a landmass in the Pacific, and it's also a time frame. It's not necessarily just a physical, and it's not necessarily a linear time frame. So to just complicate and confuse everything. but more recently, some Pacific cultures, the Hawaiians and the Maoris that I spoke with, they know they came from Mu, or at least were partly Mu, partly humans, I suppose. So anyway, this area covers the Pacific. However, there are colonies on the Pacific Rim that would also reflect the culture of Mu.
And what I like, there were the different people, the aquatic people, the people from the sea, the people from the stars, and the people of the land. So that's another element of this.
Yes, the Pohnpeian oral histories, as told to me by my family where I lived during the Peace Corps, there is a huge rock on the shore, Takai and Mung, and it was kind of marking the place in the water where the first humans to occupy Pohnpei came from. There were all these clam shells. There were these clams all over the place there, and they came to the surface of the water, and people emerged from the clams. They were born from out of the clams. So this is pretty amazing. Yeah. And, thinking of the birth of Venus and other such aquatic ancestors that are mentioned in other. I'm certainly not an expert on that, but the fact that it's very specific to at least this group of this area of Pohnpeians, that the first humans, and the oral histories do agree that part of the island, the people, Lepinset, was where the first people emerged or came or landed.
Yeah. Somehow they appeared. We're not sure, but this is it. Water.
Yeah. Well, and the clam shells in the clams, the female vagina clam stones. Clam in Pohnpeian is pasu, is the translation, the literal translation, but in slang, pasu means vagina. So it's this birthing, creating theme that's both in this rock by the water and then over in the Petroglyph site.
Trying to be very explicit on the origin.
Yes.
Yeah. I think it's fascinating. This is, I think, a phenomenal reference, and I love the fact that it includes the indigenous culture that is represented, that their beliefs, that their history, their oral traditions and stories are a piece of this, and not just the Western linear thing of, okay, this is the date, this is what we visualize, and this is how we might experience it without talking to the locals.
Exactly.
Again, the book, The Petroglyphs of Mu, Pohnpei, Nan Madol, and the Legacy of Lemuria. I'll put the links in the description for the show. Thanks for listening.